Good day, folks. This is Mark Anthony Williams with So You Want to Be a Safety Professional. And we've got a special topic today. But before I go into the topic, I'm going to let our guest give his introduction so you guys can learn a little bit more about him, and we'll get started. Hey, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, Mark Anthony. And yourself?
Can't complain. Do you want to tell our guests who you are and what company you represent?
Sure. My company is called SafeMap. I formed this company in 1994 in Australia after I spent my first 30 years of my life in South Africa. I trained as a psychologist there, and then started working for a big mining company in South Africa, which is today BHP. And I was the group safety manager or group risk manager for this organization. Then started SafeMap in 1994 in Australia, lived there for 12, 13 years, and then moved to Canada after that, about 12, 13 years ago. But all along,
Australia to Canada. Jesus Lord.
Yeah, consulting in the field of the psychology of risk, if you could, a very short term for that.
Okay. All right. I like it. And do you want to tell our viewers what our title is today? You know, we were just talking about how interesting a title it was.
Yeah. The title is The Devil's in the Data, and very much in the detail of that data. And what is the impact of what I call latent metrics on safety? It's a bit of a different angle on, a very different angle on how we measure safety.
That's true. I think today's safety is mainly measured by some lagging indicators, especially here in the US. You know, we wait until we have injuries and we're tracking how many injuries we have, but it doesn't necessarily track safety management or the performance of safety management. It mainly tracks what happens after someone gets hurt. So can you provide us an overview of what latent metrics are and why they're often overlooked in safety management?
Yes, I think it all starts with, how do we define safe? You know, I've been exploring the word safe, and it seemed like pretty obvious. Safe is safe, nothing goes wrong.
Right.
But while nothing goes wrong, you know, visibly no accident, there's actually a lot that can and does go wrong in the organization. You know, we talk about them as near misses and things like that. So how do we define safety determines everything. So there's the old, so-called old definition of safety is the absence of accidents. And then from that, you get zero targets and so on. The new view in safety is, pretty much being used around these days, is the presence of capacity or the presence of controls. Now, both of those are very different metrics, but even the one of the presence of capacity, even if you have great capacity, you can still have adverse events. You can still have, and companies experience, catastrophic events. So I don't believe either of those definitions are helpful. And I've defined safety in a different way. And it's very simple definition. It is the readiness to respond to risks relentlessly. Now, if you look at that definition, it changes everything. It changes how you manage safety and risk. It changes how you measure it. And that's how you then get to the whole idea of latent metrics, because you can measure readiness, you can measure response, you can measure risks, and you can measure relentlessly in the organization. And that's in a way latent metrics.
So you're quantifying how prepared are you to handle, what a capacity you have to handle these unfortunate events that might happen. Not necessarily just recording the event happening itself. Is that fair to say?
Very well said.
Makes a lot more sense. Wow. Can you give us some more examples of latent metrics that have a significant impact on safety that you've seen?
Yeah. So, most people are familiar with the term black swans. Catastrophic events in organizations that have happened and out of the blue, out of the black, as they say. But when you look at those black swan events, after the event, Then it all makes sense. Then everybody can very cleverly sit in a chair and analyze the accidents. Oh, this happened, this happened, this happened. These are all the precursors. Now, why didn't we know about those precursors, those latent metrics? And the simple answer to that is because we haven't been looking for them. Because we define safety as nothing goes wrong, and therefore we don't have to look for them. So I've actually, for a significant part of my career, I've done very major events or processes for organizations. That the latest one was called the elimination of fatalities. How do we eliminate fatalities? So I facilitated the process very quickly, what the process looks like. It is a week-long process on a site, a location, and I do a lot of work in the mining industry, where we bring 6 to 8 people from outside that company. And they merge with 6 to 8 people inside the company. And they work in pairs. And those pairs then go out, walk past everything that's visible, the management, the PowerPoints. They go to talk to the workers at the front end. And then they're going to look for black swan events, or what I later called purple dragons. A purple dragon is a catastrophic event that can be predicted and can be discovered. And that's what we look for. And that's where we started looking into what are these metrics that exist in organizations that we're not looking for, but if we are looking for them, we can find them. And
so they're there, they've been there the entire time. We just haven't been paying attention.
We haven't been, well, not so much haven't been paying attention. We haven't got the mechanisms, the processes to actually go and measure them.
Okay.
So, and I think there is this a very famous saying, what you look for is what you find.
Right.
And
if you go look for
you don't look for them, you're not going to find them. But if you look for them and you have a right process, then you can actually find them. And so you asked me for some example. I, after one of these activities for this mining company, we visited 42 mine sites, and we developed, after that, we developed what I call the coefficient of chronic unease. And that coefficient of chronic unease had 7 metrics in it. And I'll just give you one example. One example is, what is the view of failure, or the views on failure in the organization? What is the management's view of failure? When something goes wrong, what is their response? And there's 3 possibilities. One is human error is seen as the main issue. People make mistakes because they make mistakes, and we had an accident. Or what is the safety system the cause? Is it deeper inside the organization, or is it way upstream? Is it in the safety culture of the organization? Now, those 3 levels, the extent to which they exist in an organization is a latent metric. And if you think about it, it's either midstream, upstream, or downstream. Right. And so therefore, that's just one. And we've identified 7 of those that you can focus on.
I think that a lot of times companies are primarily worried about liability. And because they're primarily worried about liability, it's kind of like pass the hot potato or transfer that liability. So they're looking at, okay, can I transfer this liability up front to a contractor or another third party, A, or B, how can I show that I did my due diligence and that this employee that I hired acted on his own accord? Like I could not prevent him from doing whatever that unsafe behavior was that led to him being hurt or led to the catastrophe. But I also think that 9 times out of 10, like you said, most of this is systemic, and it usually starts, probably upstream. And it takes kind of a top level coming down approach versus just looking from a micro perspective at, okay, he did it, so he must be around or something must be wrong with him, versus, well, how is our system designed to train him and monitor him and encourage him to do the right thing and set him up for success? Am I right in saying that?
You're actually touching upon one of the biggest problems in our industry. And it is not something that we often talk about. It's not something that we even like to talk about, but you are absolutely spot on. The reason why we focus on anything other than the systems and the culture in the organization is that transferring of risk or liability. And I'm not too sure how we overcome that, because it is inherent in the legal system of the country. It's inherent. We have criminalized safety to such a large degree that it is almost impossible to step back. And now you are so right. If I am the owner of a big business and I say to the legal tax out there, okay, I'm to blame. It's in my system, and this system has got the potential to create many more accidents. Are you out of your mind? Am I going to say that? You're just not.
I'm not going to put that in an email.
And that's the fundamental issue. And therefore, it is very easy for us to sit and talk about the theories of safety and the theories of metrics and all these things, but we haven't been able to address a very, very fundamental issue, the criminalization of safety.
Can you discuss a real-world scenario where ignoring latent metrics had more serious repercussions? What have you seen?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are so many, of these famous catastrophic events, like Deepwater Horizon and the Texas refineries, and all these are very classic examples. But there's one event that I've actually studied in depth, and it is an accident happened in Canada. It is a rail accident. Now, there's been several rail derailments in the rail industry after this one, but this in 2016. Canada was at that stage almost boasting that they have the safest rail industry in the world.
Oh boy.
This particular organization even claimed that they're operating practically at zero. Those were their words. And on this day, on this night, a very tragic example happened. A train was stopped for the overnight to be changing the shift. The driver left the train there, and by procedure, he followed every rule. He kept the engine running to keep the air brakes running. He activated 7 mechanical brakes. He then went to town and slept, because the next day another train driver would come and take the train further. 70 fuel tankers it was pulling. Now, during the night, a small fire started on the engine, and the fire department came out and they extinguished the fire, but they shut the engine down because they had to, which meant the air brakes was now shut down. They let the company know that this has happened. The company said, no problem, we've got mechanical brakes. And unfortunately, that weight, the momentum of that 70 tankers was too heavy for the mechanical brakes, and it started running. And it started running unattended and hit the town on a curve at 1 o'clock that morning and derailed in the center of town, and 47 people died in their sleep.
Oh my God.
Massive fire. This is just a few years ago. Now, all the metrics that was in existence in this organization, this cultural metrics, the upstream metrics, the latent metrics that they could have measured but didn't have the means to, was not measured. And it was a traumatic outcome.
Yeah,
now, that's an example of if we're not focusing on indices that exist in our organization, and then suddenly now everybody looks back and says, oh, but now we know. And exactly to your point, who got the blame for this whole thing?
The conductor who
the train driver.
Yep.
The train driver.
So instead of this triggering a larger event of perspective and introspection on what could we have done differently, how often do we test these brakes and their capacity, how often do we maintain the brakes or anything like that, it simply came down to, well, this is his fault.
Now, after this event and after this train driver and the 2 other managers above him were both arrested and put in jail initially. But I think there was some sense coming to the fore in the Canadian system, because eventually the guys were released and the investigation by the transport board was actually very, very thorough after that, and really look into the depth of the whole event in a much more dynamic way. So in this particular case, but this was after 47 people died.
That's very unfortunate. Gosh.
Yeah.
How can organizations incorporate latent metrics into their existing safety management systems? What do you think would make a difference here?
Well, they simply cannot incorporate into their existing safety management systems. And that's the problem. We have to create new processes. We have to create new systems to measure the things that we don't know. And, if I just give you some examples of, so let's talk about what is a very powerful latent metric is the organization's safety culture. Now, we won't go into the debate whether an organization has a culture and or a safety culture separately. I think there's enough evidence in my world that an organization does have a safety culture that may even exist counter to their organizational culture, because we have so many different ways or different influences on safety. They will get legal, and here we talk about earlier on criminalization of safety. So it has an impact and creates a different culture of safety within the organization's culture. But strength of culture, the maturity of the organization's culture, how aligned is the various levels in the organization in terms of perceptions, how well integrated is safety and organizational processes. The very famous topic, buzzword these days, psychological safety. Those are all latent metrics. Now, they don't exist in current safety management systems, because they're almost additional to that. We have to go out and say, well, let's conduct a safety culture analysis, and then we can say this is the metric.
It's really not a traditional thing to do, honestly. You hear about job hazard assessments, you hear about ergonomic assessments, but very rarely do you hear about safety cultural assessments.
Yeah, it is an onerous thing for an organization to do, because you got to pull employees out, you got to measure their perceptions, and that's a whole different ballgame. So it doesn't get done as often as it could be. But if you have that's one of the things that we've done, is we've developed almost a monkey survey for safety culture. And so that it can be readily attached to your safety software. It can be done internally, but that means you can now start to measure very often and very regular the culture in the organization. I'll tell you an example of an organization that basically measures their safety culture every week now. It is an organization in Namibia, in Africa, for whom we've developed a system called Safe Sentry. And it's got a dual function. One is we use the expertise of employees to identify fatal risks, or purple dragons in my terminology. So they go out with a tablet and they go and talk to other employees. One person a day has the role of the Safe Sentry, and another day another person has. So when they do this observations with each other, they actually take photos of potential catastrophic risks or fatal accidents, but they then also conduct a mini survey with this person. They ask this person just 4 questions. And every time the app opens, it's new 4 questions. So over a period of a week, they actually have collected data of the perceptions of employees about the culture in the organization. And then on a weekly basis, they have a look at this and can make very preemptive decisions about risk and culture in their organization. So that's how it can be actually integrated into the normal metrics of an organization.
It sounds as if you're finding a convenient way to quantify the cultural perspectives on safety.
Exactly.
And I guess that leads to my final question here is, what role do technological solutions like analytics software play in unearthing and utilizing latent metrics?
I think if we're able to create a suite of latent metrics, and they can then be starting to be integrated into your analytics software, you can actually start to do a very powerful continuous metric, continuous measurement in the organization. And some organizations, some of the software that I've seen are attempting to do that. They're getting into, for instance, close-out rates of hazards, or the period of time between a hazard reported and closed out, and those kind of metrics as leading indicators. But that's still at the superficial level. That's still at a hazard physical level. It's not
just physical hazards. You're not really talking about a person's perspective or how they perceive a hazard or what they were likely to do, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely were you to report this if you hadn't been asked about it?
Exactly, yeah.
Scale of 1 to 10,
of a very simple metric that can be introduced into software. And this is the ratio between hideable and non-hideable risks identified. And I think that it's very simple, very powerful metric. And you can do it in your organization right now. If you look at your near-miss reporting or your hazard reporting, and you just simply ask your question, if they didn't report this particular hazard, would anyone have known? Is it something that they could have hidden very easily? And if they didn't report it, no consequence to them. So there was no damage, there was no witnesses or something like that. But they, two vehicles approach an intersection, they nearly collide, but they don't, and they drive off. And then one of those two drivers report this incident. That's what I call not a near miss, but maybe a far miss. And it's hideable. So if you have 4 of these hideable reports for every one that could not be hidden,
right?
You are in a level of risk maturity in your organization that's much better. But most organizations, what is being reported is what could not be hidden away, and therefore you're at a reactive. A near miss is a lagging indicator. It's something that's already happened, and we're not into this realm of what potentially can happen, and that's where we need to have software analytics in that range.
Gosh, you make a lot of sense here. And when I think about it a little bit more now, I also think about the fact that I can see the physical or almost tangible return on investment and why safety tends to prioritize more so the ergonomic assessments and the JHAs and that kind of stuff. But something like culture, the benefits or return on that investment would be a bit harder to see, to use, especially if you don't have experience with it. So I could see why maybe as a result there's a little bit more bias towards what we can physically control or handle or put a engineering control over versus something that takes longer and requires behavioral changes and coaching. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, and that actually touches upon a very important shift in thinking. When I started thinking about this definition of safety is the readiness to respond to risks, that has to exist in the culture of the organization, the readiness, in the maturity of the organization to foster the kind of reporting that we talked about earlier on, as one example. But then secondly, we tend to still focus a lot on let's fix the physical work environment. Let's fix the hazards in the organization. Mm-hmm. And that is still a predominant focus in organizations. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But the unfortunate result of that is we are still reactive. We are still focusing on the physical things around us. So if you look at readiness to respond to risk, you're actually focusing on the human factor in the safety equation. And so my mantra is humans are the strongest link in the safety chain. Now, if you think about that, most safety professionals would say to you, no, humans are the weakest link in our safety chain. They make the mistakes, and everybody wants to focus on that. But if you flip it around, you now actually, if you look at that human being as a very powerful entity in your organization, and you equip them, you create readiness to respond to risk in them They're the smartest risk management system we have. Nothing can compete with a human being. And I love to use the example of Captain Sully Sullenberger, who landed the plane in the Hudson River and saved the day, and 152 people survived. Now, if you think about it, what did he do? He actually did the wrong thing. He actually decided in that moment, I'm not going to try and reach the airport, which is what the procedure says. He took a risk, and that risk saved the day.
Right.
And so if you think about it, and you read any accident happens, aviation accidents, you would always see pilot error coming into the equation somewhere.
Yeah.
Or in our case, human error. But for every one accident where a pilot error can be blamed, there were hundreds of situations where the pilot saved the day. And humans saved the day.
Right.
And we are not focusing on that at all. Your employees, every day.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Every employee, every company has a lot of employees every day that do little things
that prevents,
create safety. So we create safety through the eyes of our employees if we support them as the readiness to respond to risk as the strongest link in a safety chain.
That, you know what? I've always kind of thought that, and I kind of agree with you here, if you train your people, you educate them, and you get their buy-in, the more you equip them with the tools to work safely and make their job easier, right? I believe that they, in turn, it raises their hazard awareness. And that means that now they can make better decisions, which keeps everybody safe and keeps the organization safe as well, right? I've always thought that. And even when I've had to implement near-miss programs, near-miss reporting programs and whatnot, I always make sure that a big proponent of that is that the training lines up with the tasks they're doing to show them the hazards associated with those tasks and ask them, how do you think you can do this job easier? If you can make this job easier, what do you see? What would you change about this machine or this process path and how far you have to walk or push a cart or the height of a bench or the height of a table? And I'd get some really interesting responses, because when I started making people, aware of these things, that, hey, these are changeable, these are moldable variables, now they get very creative and they start realizing, you know what? I don't necessarily have to overreach this way 100 times to pick up this box before I pack it. Can we move this box station lower? Can we make it a little bit more accessible? Because then instead of me having to reach this way 100 times in 20 minutes, I only have to reach 5, and I don't have to reach to that degree of an angle. That's the kind of stuff that and these are ideas from people on the production force that management supervisors may not necessarily have, or people sitting in a corporate office would not have arrived at.
We talk a lot about safety these days of engage the worker. Workers are not the problem; they're the solution. It's like almost a recent discovery in safety that, hey, the worker is actually the answer to our problems, the solution for us. But it is really very, very old, and that's why I love the work of Edward Deming. The Japanese in the 1950s and 60s of the previous century started with quality circles. That is exactly what we now say in safety. Oh, we should engage the worker. It is a solution that was sitting in front of us for almost 100 years now, and yet we've never really grasped this and grabbed this well in safety. But in other parts of the management systems, quality and human resources and so on, it is an age-old concept. So why we only discover that now in safety?
That's a good point. It's the same concepts. It doesn't matter if it's safety, quality, production, reliability. It's the same concepts. You're absolutely right.
Edward Deming said, create pride in workmanship. Give exactly what you just said about employees. You equipment, you give them that pride to do their jobs. They will tell you how to do that best. And that's what Edward Deming said in 1980, in his book, Out of Crisis.
I remember that. Yeah. Well, I have but one question left. I guess, if you were to look into a little crystal ball here, what future developments do you see I mean, do you think over time latent metrics will become more important and be adopted more frequently, especially in the United States? What do you think?
I think it will. I don't think we have really much of a choice. We run out of interpretations of data as we see it, as visible data. And we are getting quite more sophisticated. I think there's a great opportunity in artificial intelligence, in technology, and we will be able to start measuring indices and processes in organization that we've never been able to measure.
Sure.
And I think that is going to be making a huge difference in our, my dream is that safety should disappear. Safety should become invisible. Just like quality in a quality movement, there's no more safety, there's no more quality officers measuring quality at the back end of a safety of a production process. It's all integrated. And I think with technology, we can actually get to a point where we will have safety so integrated into organizations that it will not be seen anymore. It will just be a given. And that's what technology can bring us in the future.
That would be amazing. And you're probably right. With AI, I could see that happening within probably the next 10 years. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Mr. Pitzer, I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us today. Do you have any final words for our guests?
Yes, I think maybe a final word is for we as safety professionals, we're always seen as we're dealing with the problems in the organizations. I think if we can really start playing a role in becoming a facilitator of innovation in an organization, that would put us into a whole different ball game where we, instead of detracting from the bottom line, we are now adding to the bottom line. And maybe we shouldn't be calling ourselves safety people anymore. Maybe we should call ourselves, resilience engineers or innovator, some other title.
Most definitely. Instead of thinking that we're just money savers, I think that we're money producers, right?
Money creators, yeah.
Okay. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed our episode, right? We spoke about a lot of good stuff today. We learned a lot about latent metrics and its impact on safety, right? And our title, was a working title. We were going back and forth for a little bit. We didn't want to take anybody off of my privileges, but we finally, decided that it was just putty enough that it was going to pass the test, right? We have our t-shirt giveaway going on, so please like and subscribe, right? We'll be picking one lucky winner from our newest fan base. The next 100 subscribers, one lucky person is going to get that t-shirt mailed to them, right? So until next time, tune in and stay safe.